I'm pleased to introduce our next speakers today, Paul Larsen and Steve Melan. Paul has been for 22 years at Microsoft Corporation in Redmond, and he's a principal program manager, and he leads the host integration engineering team to deliver and support Azure, BizTalk, SQL, Office, and Windows connectors to existing IBM systems. And Steve works as the senior IT architect and project manager at BCEE, which is the States and Savings Bank in Luxembourg. He's also driving the implementation of BCEE's web services architecture and the BizTalk and IBM legacy implementation. So over to our speakers now, who will be discussing how to integrate heritage IBM systems using cloud and on-premises connectors. They promised me that this is going to be a really funny and interesting session. So those of you who feel this has been a really long day, don't fret. This is going to be a good session. So thank you, everyone. Over to them.
We're going to talk about integrating heritage systems. They're not legacy. I mean, it's just a word anyways, right? But typically, heritage is what IBM calls it, something you value. It's a great marketing term, right? Heritage system, something you value, something you inherit that's valuable to you. Something you inherit, you have no choice in inheriting, like Steve, starting at the bank, he has his mainframe systems. Legacy has a negative connotation. You know, frankly, within a Microsoft environment, Redmond, we often use that word, but as even Microsoft has become enlightened about the value of our enterprise customers, their mission-critical tier 1 applications that run on these IBM systems, they understand it's not legacy. However, it might be useful to remind everyone just what does an IBM mainframe data center look like. Can you help us with that, Steve?
Yes.
Please switch to Steve's box, please.
Yes. So Paul asked me today to come on stage because I'm very old. I'm working, as you can see on the pictures already, in the 1957 with IBM mainframes. You can see the old-fashioned mainframe, which completely fills up a room. Then it becomes modern in let's say 10 years later. Then you can also see me on screen 10 years later, like a big handsy hair. Now my hair is already gone. And it's becoming smaller and smaller. And this is more or less what it looks like today. This is mid-range IBM mainframe server, but for the big customers, this is actually the latest one. So you can see this is the latest one that IBM announced this year. This is the Z13, which a lot of customers still using today, and the product Host Integration Server helps you to integrate this heritage IBM products with the modern Microsoft world, like say Logic apps, Power Apps, .NET applications, BizTalk, and so on.
The other thing is, so when I started eons ago at Microsoft, and then a few years before that, a company called Attachmate that does mainframe AS400 to Windows integration, there were about 20,000 mainframe data centers on the planet, and then sometime recently someone told me the number's more like 10,000. It doesn't really indicate how many mainframes there are. It indicates how many physical boxes there are. These things are blades inside. This is just a chassis, and the data storage is separate. We actually have one of these on site in Redmond. It's a business class machine, so we have all the environments. We'll be showing some of that today. And so it's not really a matter of how many there are. It's a matter of quality, scalability, performance. They've really been capable of running new and newer workloads, including Linux for web, which is what we're competing with in terms of Azure and Windows Server for web workloads.
Most of the companies also have the problems today that they cannot get rid of it because there's so old-fashioned development COBOL on it, and a lot of people have the fear that they cannot migrate it to a new modern platform because most of the developers are already gone, retired, and they cannot maintain it anymore. So they'd like to integrate their old COBOL programs with the modern world. And that is why Paul's products, Host Integration Server, comes in place to build in, integrate it in more modern applications.
So if we look at the total world here, we've got basically 3 silos. On the left side, we're looking at the cloud tier. In the middle, we have the on-premises tier. This could be a device like an automated teller machine or cash register. It could be a Windows workstation. It could be a server, such as a Windows Server machine running BizTalk, SQL IIS, or PowerBI.com. On the right side, we have the IBM tier. So we're looking left to right here, and that's pretty much what we're going to do in terms of demos today. But if you look at the right side, there's a number of different assets that we connect to. Traditional mainframes, like running ZOS, also mid-range systems. Again, 500,000 when I started working at Microsoft back in the day, closer to 100 and something thousand of those now. The modern AS400 is also a rack machine that runs not only i5 OS, the operating system for an AS400, but also runs Linux, Unix, Windows workloads and blades. Again, real popular is the IBM Unix AIX and Linux workloads on those boxes. The smallest of customers have IBM. I'm surprised working with customers, they find out they're using, say, Power BI to analyze a DB2 workload, or they're using MQ because they need to be able to communicate with a partner, which is Steve's role today in our demo. And so it's not really a matter of the size of the organization as well. So if you're a partner, you can encounter these at any time. So this session will hopefully give you some primer on that. We integrate with different assets on the back-end system. From the networking at the base level, we do protocols, gateways, client-server APIs, to the security system. You're familiar with BizTalk, Enterprise Single Sign-On, that comes from our team. So we do things like single sign-on, password synchronization. I'm going to show you that working today. We also work at the file system level. These heritage systems have structured files. Think of customer record, order detail record, multiple levels of those nested in a single binary element or array. And we have technologies that pack and unpack those arrays on the Windows site, making it more cost-effective to integrate with these systems. Databases, hierarchical databases like IMS-DB in the mainframe for order processing, DB2 relational and Formix relational databases on different platforms. And then the transaction or application batch and transaction processing at the highest level of the stack. Customer information control system is very popular out there today. One I'll mention on the very far right top is TPF. So Steve often asks, why would customers integrate? And I go, in some cases they don't integrate with these systems. They're closed boxes. And a good example of that is railroads. Scheduling of railroad engines and even reservation systems. They're very closed. You'll see at best a terminal or terminal emulation window into transaction processing field, or TPF. They need to be secure. They need to be scaled and high performance, and they're not even allowing us to integrate yet. So there's still a lot of opportunity to get at these systems, and I think one of the ways we're going to get there is with the cloud. One of the recent changes that is really interesting for me is what's happening in the EU. Legislation is now allowing our enterprise customers to consider using Azure for extending their data center in a hybrid scenario.
Correct. Actually, the EBA, which is actually the European Banking Association, now allows, perhaps at the end of the year, also the using of the Azure and also the other clouds around the world. Also in, let's say, more Luxembourg, where I'm coming from, also our national government now allows also the usage of cloud technologies so that we can integrate. The only thing is that the first hub must be inside Europe, and the other hubs can be outside, so the backup. So this is something that is coming out. Also, perhaps you have heard about legislation, which is called GDPR, which is actually the fact that you have to prove where the data is stored and who is accessing the data. So this is actually by the EU under the EBA taking a look at, and I think at the end of the year this must be done.
Yeah, so from my perspective, our European customers were very fixated on Azure Stack, waiting for Azure Stack, waiting for Azure Stack, waiting for things like Logic Apps to be in Azure Stack. Now they're looking at Azure itself, which is great. They don't have to wait any longer. And also the what do you call it, GDP? GDR?
What?
The data protection.
That is GDPR.
Right. That one is also propelling customers who have so much data they cannot cost-effectively store on the mainframe. And not even on Windows Server and SQL. They have to go to Azure SQL Database for scale out and accessibility. So that's very encouraging. If you look at the different connectors we're offering, today we're going to show you two connectors primarily in our demos, DB2 and MQ. They're the most popular. They're two of the most popular connectors in BizTalk, and they're bound to be two of the most popular connectors in Logic Apps, certainly based on the early adopters that we're working with.
And starting from AJS 2016, you have also now a native MQ client, which is built in. Last year we showed the client also in the Integrate conference that we showed also that the performance was even 4 times faster than the IBM client itself.
Yeah, and we'll explain why that's important in a moment. So from a DB2 connector perspective, what we're doing is we're taking host integration server technology, it's supplemental to BizTalk, and we're providing pure .NET stack as part of the Power BI mashup engine. That's available for Power BI workloads for business analytics and business intelligence, as well as for access in the cloud using Logic Apps, Flow, and Power Apps. So fundamentally, at the very lower left-hand of the column, what we have is a Microsoft client for DB2 in Formix, and it's using the DRDA, which is Distributed Relational Database Architecture. That's an industry standard protocol and format. IBM has proprietary protocols and formats, and they have some proprietary formats that they pushed into the standards organization. We actually sit with IBM on the standards for this. And DRDA allows us to get at anything that's enabled for DRDA. And then right now, outbound from cloud and Power BI, we're getting into DB2 and Informix. To get on-prem from the cloud, we'll be using the on-premises data gateway. That's the same technology that's used in the Power BI stack as well. And you will have heard about that today, and you'll see that again used by John Fancy tomorrow in his enterprise connection. On the right side, the IBM systems. I'm going to connect to IBM DB2 for ZOS. But we can also connect to IBM cloud databases, for example, DashDB. DashDB looks to us, using this protocol, like IBM DB2 for Linux. On-prem, these technologies can be used as well. You install Host Integration Server, you install SQL Server, you install Power BI, you'll get our client for DB2. And depending upon the environment, you'll have .NET available, ODBC, or OLADB, and that last one is for SQL Server. So there's no IBM code on the Microsoft platform, whether it's cloud, desktop, device, server. And on the IBM side, there's no Microsoft code. We have no footprint over there, which makes us unique compared to a lot of vendors that do integration with the IBM systems. Informix looks a lot like a DB2. It's using the same wire protocol. And frankly, what we do is we make IBM systems look like Microsoft systems. So you don't know that you're connecting to a backend system. We hide all those idiosyncrasies, all that complexity. And as Steve mentioned, the MQ connector in the very far left bottom, it's using the Microsoft client. That's brand new technology. Now, MQ client server protocol and formats are not documented. We devised that protocol, implemented it at Microsoft, so we have a full .NET stack. And that's required to provide efficient connectivity from the Power BI stack and from the cloud, Logic Apps, Flow, and Power Apps.
Yeah, I was using the IBM client for MQ for, let's say, 10 years. And the problem was always that it was not very performant. For a lot of messages, we took a lot, let's say, 4 hours to consume all the messages for our night treatment. And then with the Microsoft client, we could divide everything by 4, almost by 4 the time. And it is not that it's cheaper or it's more expensive, but it's the time that we could gain on everything. It's only the time. For example, you can divide everything by 4, and it's very low weight, so you don't have to install a complete Eclipse environment, 500 meg from IBM. Here you install, let's say, 3 meg, 5 meg, and it's working. You don't have to install something on the Windows platform. You don't have to install something on the mainframe platform. So it's only the connector, the DLL, the assemblies, the .NET ADO assemblies, connecting, and it's working.
And those are very good reasons why Microsoft, because frankly, you can use IBM as well. Not from the cloud, but from Microsoft Windows desktops, devices, and servers. You can use the IBM clients for MQ and DB2, and if you're familiar with our BizTalk adapter for MQ, we start out with the MQ server footprint, then we came out with the MQ server client footprint. Now we have an option for the MQSC BizTalk adapter to use our own client. And frankly, it can also be, we have to be careful because the modern Microsoft, we don't want to be arrogant, but we think we do a better job of implementing these protocols on the Microsoft platforms than IBM does. They're focused on cross-platform. And frankly, they do the best job for the Java workloads. So not to say anything bad about our partner competitor in IBM.
And it's also quite easy to do a migration from the IBM client in BizTalk to the Microsoft, because it's only just a switch, just a flag and the connector.
Yep, drop down this box.
on, off, it's fine.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is when you connect to some of these backend systems, there are additional licenses required for the IBM client. So an example would be Power BI Desktop or Power BI Server. In order to connect to DB2 for the mainframe AS400, well, first of all, it's not supported with the IBM client because we haven't tested and coded all the way through the stack. So we introduced the Microsoft client there to have a fully tested connectivity into those backend systems using Power BI, but also license. There's an additional cost license to connect IBM clients to their servers, and it's free with Microsoft. Okay, all that prep work. So let's show you some technology. This is the fun part.
Yeah.
So Contosa Fitness is our overall scenario. And what we're showing you today is, well, forget there. What's your step count?
I think 10,000 steps today.
Yeah, you don't have 10,000 steps.
No?
I have like 4,000,
Okay.
four or
I was
5,000.
cheating, so I went a lot today. I was running all around the block here. No, just kidding.
I got
have fun.
15,000 yesterday and
Yeah.
20,000 the day before. But
Yeah. Okay.
So what happens when you do all this exercising? In fact, I'm suffering
Wow.
from that right now.
Yeah, actually, I'm become very tired, and afterwards, well, I would like to eat something. And for eating something, there we have introduced Contoso Fitness Cafe, and this is our demo for today. So Paul is actually running the cafe.
I'm
And
the
shipper.
cafe manager, and one of our most popular items is a smoothie. And I'm sure Jim could use a smoothie this morning after your run at 4:30 in the morning. Could use one right now as well. And so what we need to do is order some more berries for our smoothies. And so I'll be the cafe manager, and I'm going to do order processing. And then to help ship the order, I'm working with my partner across
I'm the shipper.
domains. I'm using one Azure domain, Steve's in another one. And we're going to use HTTP between the two domains. My backend system, Contoso Fitness, as you know, has really grown. And as I mentioned before, it's not uncommon to have an IBM system. In our case, we're going to go ahead and just stretch that a little bit and say there's a mainframe there, and I'll be using DB2 for ZOS. We actually developed half a dozen COBOL programs for this demo as well. But as Steve and I worked together, Luxembourg and Redmond, scrunching down the time, we couldn't show you everything. But we have some really cool COBOL programs that we can introduce in our next rev of our SDK to help you get an idea of how to do this in very complex ways.
Yeah.
And then Steve's going to be using MQ on his backend system
Correct.
to
I'm
process
using
the order.
MQ and Logic app, and also what we showed this morning with also the Azure functions that I will also integrate in my demo.
Exactly. Is
Wow.
anyone shaking and shivering
Yeah.
seeing the screen?
This looks familiar to you?
Yeah. Hey, at least there's some color on here, if you could discern the color, if you don't have a red-green color blindness. But there's actually like 3 different colors on here. It's not just green
This
and
is
black.
still working today. This is not back to the 90s, so this is still today working. This is my daily work.
I'm going to check
I'm not kidding.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, again, what makes it easy for us to live in this world, partially in this world, 1 foot in, is that we get to use all this really cool technology on the side, and we get to work with all these great customers and partners.
Hey, Paul, you forgot to mention that this is the new SQL Server Management Studio.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Which I'm not running today.
And you can show how you can run a SQL statement.
So, yeah, I'm doing it right now.
Okay.
You're quizzing me. So right now I'm running a query management facility, and it's a nice little ad hoc tool of querying the DB2 database. I'm connected to instance D11, D037, so that would be a version 11 instance. It's my own, 111, get my own, nice to be manager. And 37 is a denotation for, that's right.
Per page, episodic.
Coded character set identifier, CCSID.
It's no ASCII, so it's episodic.
And yes, although one of the parts of the demo I'm going to show you, the mainframe will be calling us, and in that case, it decided to send Unicode, but that's its default these now. So they're modern systems again. They support Unicode as well. Everything we do is in terms of offloading the host system. So when we get into using these connectors, we're going to do all the data conversion, all the code page conversion, all the authentication conversion, as much of that as possible on the Windows platform, on Microsoft Azure platform, to offload the host system. So we can make those systems more performant and start migrating those workloads. So again, I was running a query here, and I have no orders in my DB2 database. And if I go over here and look at the, I wanted to call it mainframe. To me, the cloud's a host, and it is, right? It's the modern mainframe. Well, I think I'm getting old.
Yeah.
And in here, we can see we have 0 rows in our Azure SQL database. Now, I'm using an Azure SQL database for a couple of reasons. It's very common for my customers to have, and I should say our customers, because Steve works as MVP with our partners and customers as well, to have an operational data store. In this case, it's Azure SQL database. I also used it because the whole demo for me is kicking off with a Power App that I wrote literally in a minute. And it was really quick to connect to SQL, referencing a single table, and it generated some nice little UI for me, so let's use that. So we're going to add a row in the database when I place an order.
Okay.
And this is all cryptic stuff, so I have an integer for a location. Oh, what's the number of the location that needs some berries? Let's see here. There we go.
Okay.
And when do I want to order this? Well, I'm going to order that today.
Yeah,
Okay,
that will be
great.
fine.
I'm going to
What do
give
you
it a
want
little
tomorrow?
friendly description. I'm going to order something that I believe is a local delicacy. My mother's English, and we always had these growing in the yard. Anyone know gooseberries?
Ah.
Also New England? No? Okay, all right, very popular. Product ID, this isn't really well automated, so we're gonna put some data in here.
Yeah. We have to order a lot.
I'm gonna order a lot. These
Yeah.
are crates. You know what a crate is, right?
No.
So you ever pick berries?
Oh.
Silver spoon,
Bigger.
silver spoon.
Yeah.
Little bucket.
Yeah,
and
a
you put
small
it in a
bucket,
crate.
ring,
Yeah.
and then
I used to
more
get
and
paid
more.
to do this back in the day. I'm a scrapper.
Okay.
A long line of scrappers, working class.
Okay.
So we're going to commit this order. Power App's going to use the SQL connector, Azure SQL database. If we go and check our database up here again, you check it here?
Not delete.
No, don't delete it.
Okay. No.
Yeah. Okay. Run that.
Run that query. And
Okay. But if we run it over here, you'll see for a moment. DB2, nothing in DB2. Okay, nothing in DB2. So what we want to do is first process the order from a heterogeneous perspective. So I have a process order item here, and this logic app is doing just real basic stuff. I'm just going to base this on a recurrence. So I'll execute it manually now. Get rows is going to read from the Azure SQL database, and I'm going to loop through all available records in there, all the new orders, and I'm going to insert those into DB2. Hey, this is really easy to wire these things together, right? Instance variables map from one connector to another. You can do transformations that we'll talk about here in a moment. You can do custom transformations, what Steve will show you. Really easy to do. It's even easier than BizTalk.
yeah.
And that's running. We'll check the progress. So I'm connecting to DB2 through logic apps, the API hub, the mashup engines running instance of our connector for DB2, so thin layer over our ADNet provider for DB2, or our client for DB2. That's all faring over the on-prem database, the on-premises data gateway. So there's another instance of the gateway running on a Windows server in my office. It's actually running in one of our cloud VMs on-prem. In there is the full stack again. Client is connecting to DB2 via TCP/IP, and that worked fine.
And you should have your data now in DB2.
Yeah, you bet.
Well,
Woo,
there it is.
gooseberries. All right, so why include both systems? Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Well, it's actually true, right? Sometimes just getting the connectivity to work, especially with timing, can be a challenge. But no, we've had these connectors out since July in preview, and they're really in good shape. And it's been since last May in the Power BI stack, and we keep making improvements all the time. So that one's working fine. And if we go and, so we haven't actually, do you see that? We haven't actually shipped the order yet. Okay, so this is where we're going to switch over. So if we could switch to Steve's box now.
Okay, we are on my Azure VM actually, which is hosting also an MQ server, which is version 8, as you can see here. And I'm working with this queue, which is called queue ships, and actually the queue is empty. So there is no ship ID inside. So I have a queue where I'll put on my ship IDs inside. How I can populate them? I can populate them by BizTalk, for example, using the MQ client, or I can also use a .NET simple application. I have written here a .NET application, which is actually on my other box here. I can show you the code, which is quite easily. It's looking quite familiar to those who are actually using already IBM clients. Who is actually using here an IBM client for MQ? Somebody? 1, 2, 3,
Handful.
Several customers. Okay. So actually, I'm creating a connection to my MQ server, which is on my Azure VM, and I'm putting some messages inside. I'm putting nothing very interesting inside. I'm just putting here some values from 40,001 to 40,010. So nothing very interesting inside. But these are my shipping IDs. So I'm clicking on Insert into MQ. I can see here on my output that everything is inside. So now I can go on taking a look at what is my IBM server saying. Okay, I can see here actually that I have now 9 ship IDs in my queue, which Paul will use afterwards. Mm-hmm. I have written also a small application, which is a logic app. My logic app is quite easy. What is it doing? He will intercept first a message from Paul. Here you can see it intercepts a message, which is JSON. Then I'm receiving from my shipping queue a new ID. I will convert the ship ID, which is actually a string because the client is bringing back a string. I will convert it into an integer. And for doing that, I'm using an Azure function.
Remember, we're going to take these values and I'm going to update a SQL Server database and I'm going to update a DB2 database. I'm going to do it this, from within a single logic app. And there's a reason why I need an integer value back. Does anyone know? These connectors are strongly typed with their swagger to the data types in the back-end system. So a generic number or string isn't gonna work. So we have to do some data conversion here.
And then I have also another function I've defined which gives me the current date. So this morning I figured out quickly how to use the Azure functions. It took me 30 minutes approximately to figure out how this is working. I took a documentation. It's quite easy. So for those who have never worked with it, it's quite easy to do it.
Well, the funny part, though, is after we did that, we were showing the demo to Kevin and Jeff, and they go, oh, well,
there's an easy way to do that.
You should have found this morning. Yeah, there's actually some built-in capabilities, and Jeff will tell you about that.
So I have easily defined two functions, which are written in C#.
They're hidden built-in. So
yeah, they're hidden built-in.
We couldn't find them ourselves.
They will show tomorrow. Yeah. This is my easy, let's say, C# code, which is actually taking a string, and I will convert it afterwards into an integer. And this is the other one. This is to get the current date, which is returning nothing more than datetime.now.toString, and I convert it to a string format.
And frankly, the reason there is that we haven't taken our SQL, Oracle, DB2, and Formix database connectors to the next step in terms of handling functions within the popular functions within the statements.
Correct. And then we have actually here my logic app again, which is then using all this kind of different things. So MQ, a request coming from HTTP, and giving it back to Paul afterwards on HTTP using Azure functions. Can we switch back to Paul so that he can actually call my logic app?
Okay. So I have a ship order logic app. It's going to do a little bit more than the last one did.
So I'm waiting for your call.
Yep, absolutely. I'm going to read from DB2. I'm going to send the HTTP message to Steve. I'm going to parse the result coming back. I map those outputs from the parser and the original query from DB2 to an update statement to DB2. And then I'm going to do the same thing against SQL Server. So I'm trying to mix where I'm getting these parameters from just to show you it's all possible. And I'm going to send a nice little email at the end, again, using a mix of parameters. So run that.
Okay. I'm waiting for the request coming in.
Absolutely.
Okay, I already can see that it's running here on my side. Okay, it succeeded. Should see my result.
I'm sure it's done by now.
Okay.
There it is. Everything's green. Got that. Let's check the mainframe.
That's great.
F11 to go to the right.
Yeah, there's no scroll on the mainframe. F11, F10 is
F7
left
to go forward,
and right,
F8 to go back.
and up and down is F7, F8.
Yeah.
So.
But AS400 goes page down, page up. It's really a delight, but you get confused going from one system to another. I'll walk around campus and I'll come into my neighborhood and I'll see these green screens up because our host lab people there and the rest of us are using these things. And I'll go, wow, that looks familiar. Oh, wait, that's my life. Yeah, okay. And you'll see me looking behind cash registers when I go to a store, or you go to Costco in the US, they have AS400 terminal. You see me looking at the green screen. Yeah. Really nerdy.
I think more or less all airports are still using AS400 on mainframes now. Because there you can also see the screen.
Yeah. So as I said, reservation systems tend to be very sensitive to performance. And if we check our order, the gooseberries, there it's shipped there as well. So even Power Apps can see the update. One more thing I want to show you here. So this is a console look at another technology we have in HAS. It's a gateway from DB2 into SQL Server. In this case, it's going to be DB2 for ZOS is going to query, and it can do insert, update, delete, call, all that stuff, Azure SQL database. Yep. That must be 10 minutes remaining.
Yep.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thanks.
So if we go over here to, you have to also have a sense of humor and make yourself laugh, right?
Yeah.
It's like, legacy, no, heritage.
Commentary.
So I'm going to use, Steve identified this right. Oh, three-part name.
Yeah.
So everyone's familiar with SQL Server, link servers, three-part name queries, that sort of thing. The first part's the catalog, the next part's the schema, the last part's the object ID. In this case, I've registered, it's understood in DB2 as well. There's a set of catalog tables where I can to find a remote location, how I'm going to connect to it via TCP/IP or SNA. In this case, we support TCP/IP. What the authentication credentials are outbound, what type of security I want, do I want encrypted security, that sort of thing. I've defined all that already. If I run this query, you'll see that I'm getting a response. This is actually coming back from Azure SQL database. And if I show you here, this is a console view of this running Windows service. This is actually a connection from DB2 for ZOS to Azure SQL database. And the reason I show this is that the bulk of the demo was Windows initiated or Azure initiated, but we also support the bidirectionality of things. So anything we don't do bidirectionally is MQ, and we'll talk about that in the roadmap here, and we'll get right on that. But yeah, you can see a connection coming in from the mainframe, the credentials are coming in from the mainframe, and I take the rack FID, I use host-initiated single sign-on. If you're familiar with BizTalk, you know about this. I'm validating those credentials, and I'm mapping that to, in my case, a Redmond domain credential, Microsoft Active Directory domain credential, and I'm mapping that to Windows-initiated single sign-on for outbound to Azure SQL database, where I'm using map credentials for username and password. So really cool technology, and it's used by our customers that are serious about migrating the data, but they need the applications like CICS programs to be able to still connect to the remote database, which is SQL Server or Azure SQL database. Okay, so.
But why should I offload my data from my DB2 to the Azure, to the SQL Server?
The main reason to migrate off of mainframe DB2, AS Runner DB2, and onto SQL Server Azure SQL database is cost. Cost of licensing, you can afford to keep 1 or 2 copies of DB2 in stock. Once it gets more than 2 years out of life cycle, it becomes very expensive for extended support. Another cost is just the cost of storage on these heritage systems. A DASD drive, a hard drive, costs so much more than it would in a normal array that you'd use for Windows servers. Just the sheer volume of the data for business analytics, Power BI, we're seeing customers migrate data to SQL Server. And then, as I mentioned before, Azure Data Factory. Thanks for running. Azure Data Factory is a key scenario for ours. What we did for Azure Data Factory, and you can see here referenced in the lower left, is we've taken our Microsoft client for DB2 and our internet provider in a real thin layer, different than what we do in the mashup engine. Azure Data Factory today has built-in support for DB2. It is absolutely much faster than the client support we had through the IBM component. What are we missing? We talked about bidirectional, talked about the different platforms, run this in Azure VMs. Supported platforms, left side Microsoft, right side IBM. Something to note here. So, good news for your enterprise customers and partners. Bad news for us in Redmond is that it's really hard to say no to enterprise customers. No sense of humor about failures and faults, performance issues, and really they don't take no for an answer. So we're familiar with that, and we have a reputation for having fixes ready before the case can get escalated, and we have a reputation for providing what are called requests for price quotients, that's what IBM calls them, RPQs, or QFEs, quick fix engineering hot fixes, where we provide functionality to you intra-release. In this case, what we're doing is we're saying yes to customers that want to have multiple levels of Microsoft support, 2 versions of BizTalk supported with our adapters, 2 versions of SQL Server, 2 versions of Visual Studio, that sort of thing. And on the IBM side, again, their life cycle. So the real dance for us is how do we match our shipping of major releases and cumulative updates to be able to hit the sweet spot of what's supported on both platforms. And then what we do is intra-release, we do certification on new IBM Microsoft platforms. Talked about some of the new stuff today. Telemetry, I'll just make a call out telemetry. Just like everyone else, we're metrics driven. We make decisions based on numbers of requests, quality requests, and we put telemetry into Host Integration Server 2016. In CE1, we added even more, plus we refined the telemetry that we're capturing to make it more efficient with a specific telemetry service and the way we capture the data and return it. We really encourage you to leave telemetry turned on, at least when you do your pre-production deployment, so we can see some of those numbers. And then if you are concerned about any latency or performance issues, you should talk to us, because we can talk about our implementation here in detail. Resources, key thing, contact us. It's Paul Larsen with an E, Danish, not Swedish. Steve Melan at live.com. I told him it's a defunct property. He needs to go to outlook.com. But anyways, you can still get them there until we turn that off. Roadmap. So I mentioned CU2. That's probably this fall. We have a new version of IBM DB2 for ZOS V12. I'm actually running it. I didn't use it today, but it looks pretty good. Got my own instance first, of course.
Framework support.
Yep,
Important.
Framework 4.7, it's backwards compatibility. You already see that in BizTalk and NCU. Visual Studio 2017. SQL Server 2017, where we'll put the Microsoft client in the box again with their feature pack. A couple of ideas for you next. Let us know. We're here all week, of course, and we really want to get feedback from you on our roadmap. Some ideas that I've heard from customers.
Yep.
The DB2 and Formix are lag in the SQL connector a little bit. We don't have call support for stored procedures yet. Insert identity, it's coded. I just need to get it checked in and tested. Update partial columns. Both SQL Server and DB2 will still have that problem. We're requiring you to re-enter the values on an update for any non-nullable column. That's because we haven't finished that implementation. We know how to code it, though. It's Oracle, where it's a little bit harder. PowerShell for generating host metadata. I mentioned before that we do all the data conversion on the PC platform. We need a metadata map locally. So we have things like COBOL, COBOL 400, RPG import wizards. And that's used in the Visual Designer and Visual Studio that we have. However, customers like Steve have hundreds of these, sometimes thousands.
No,
They need to
even
automate
5,000
these.
actually.
Even 5,000.
5,000 COBOL programs still maintaining, and so everything is actually done in the designer. And that's why I've asked Paul if he could create a PowerShell script that I can generate directly from a COBOL program directly in my web service or my WCF.
And
these are some ideas that I gave to Paul for the next release, but I hope that other customers as well will push him a little bit, creating new features.
So Steve is a classic rapid deployment early adopter.
Yep.
We worked with him since we shipped the last release, and
I
still asking for things up to the last moment, even after the release. So we went and implemented this post-release because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Is Saravana still in the room? No? I would like to thank him also for BizTalk 360 because there's also a great feature inside, which is actually an MQ watch, which helps you, for example, when there's an MQ not correctly consumed, to see it directly, and it informs you by an alert, by mail, by SMTP tram, or some stuff like that. So actually, there is a commitment also from BizTalk 360 also to integrate MQ as an alert system inside, because a lot of customers still working with IBM MQ.
And lastly, something that's pretty obvious is we've done the MQ client, and I can imagine at some point we're going to continue getting requests to do an MQ listener. Yeah. So inside BizTalk, you can see that as a receive function, inbound, up and running, waiting for an MQ message to come to us. I'm not talking about an MQ server or broker here. I'm talking about basic implementation allows to listen for, receive, and process an MQ message coming to us. Again, you can see it running in logic apps, maybe even service bus. So let us know your thoughts on that. I'm not going to show you now, but we have a number of other slides in here. They're in there for you to help educate your team. Certainly call on us. We'd be happy to do a Skype meeting with you. Partners as well, a little bit of idea about some of the other technology that we have that perhaps we'll talk about in the October event. Want to give you the sense that you can have confidence. If you change jobs and you're working for an enterprise that has these systems, you have the confidence to work with our partners, work with Microsoft directly, and integrate these systems. Also migrate. We have a specific program for migration. It's not my team, but we're there available to talk to you about phase migrations, and we're there to talk about integration. So have confidence. There are legacy systems, some highly valued as heritage, as IBM would say. Yeah. And with that, I want to thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to the drinks. Cheers.